I stayed at your home this past summer in Cape Cod. I had an amazing time. Hung out with your incredible daughter, Kik, who's become a good friend. Met some of your other children. But the highlight was bumping into your mother. Your mother is an American icon. She's a legend. It's incredible that Bobby's 92-year-old mother is alive and well, thank God, living in Cape Cod. And it's rare that anyone sees her, but your sister had taken her out on the dock to enjoy the sun. And I was honored. She raised 11 children by herself in the wake of an unspeakable tragedy. She never seemed to complain. She was pregnant when your father was murdered on the 5th of June in 1968. And what we share in common is that although my father, thank God, lived, my mother raised 5 kids completely by herself. What feelings of gratitude do you have to Ethel Kennedy for how she raised you as a single mother? Do you have your microphone?
And thank you, Rabbi, and I do feel very blessed by God tonight, one, to be here with Nisi and Ricky, and to offer my condolences to them and my prayers to your whole family, and also to be here with Rabbi Shmuley and have his voice be worse than mine. When my first appearance at Carnegie Hall, and I was worried about being overshadowed by him, so I feel that this is a gift. But you know, there was a lot of chaos in my family after my dad was killed. I was 14 years old when my dad was killed. I was with him in Los Angeles, and my mom was faced with raising, you know, all these kids who were not, you know, we were a very chaotic group of kids. And I had a difficult relationship with my mom. My mom invented tough love, and I didn't get along with when I was a kid, and I had a lot of sort of, I would say, acting out behavior. I ran away from home a lot. I hopped freight trains across the country, and but after I got sober, I actually took my mother out she goes swimming a half mile out in the ocean every day. And I wanted to have a conversation with her and apologize to her for a lot of, you know, for the pain that I'd caused her and for not being a better son to her. And I knew she wouldn't want to have that conversation with me because that's not the kind of conversation that she likes. She's very, she's a storyteller. She's very funny. But she doesn't like a lot of kind of introspection. And so I wanted to get her in a place where she couldn't leave the room. And so I followed her. I swam out in the middle of Nantucket Sound with her. And I had this conversation with her where I said to her, I cleaned up my side of the street. And I said, you know, I want to apologize for not being a better son to you, for increasing the burden on you after my dad died, for not being a better example to my brothers and sisters. And I came home from that, and my relationship after that with her changed dramatically. And I was able to see her in a different light because so many of us see our parents as people who owe us something. And that relationship, you know, we're never satisfied with. And particularly if you come from a big family like me with 11 siblings, you know, you feel like there's reason to feel that you didn't get enough attention or other people did. And there's all that kind of baggage in the relationship, particularly if you have expectations. as every child does from their parent, you have a certain set of beliefs about what your parent is supposed to do for you. And, and there's an advantage on finding that they didn't give you enough, because the child who feels aggrieved gets the most food. And, so biologically we're hardwired to believe that our parents kind of let us down. And I had some of those feelings. And that day they all disappeared. And I was able to see my mother for the first time for the human being that she was, and this extraordinary human being. And the more that I realized that, the more grateful I was. I saw all the gifts that she had given me. I saw the piety. She had this combination of deep religious piety combined with irreverence and a skepticism toward the clergy. And it's an odd, paradoxical thing, but it was beautiful. She had this kind of rebellious spirit and at the same time deep faith. And she was an incredible raconteur and storyteller. She was a world-class athlete. She had the high jump record on horseback, but she could do every sport. She was one of the best amateur tennis players, women tennis players in the world, and won many, many tournaments. But she could do every sport, and it's one of the reasons my father fell in love with her. And she was competitive. She has extraordinary sense of humor to this day. She makes everybody laugh, and she's always laughing. And I saw all of these gifts that she had given me, the commitment, the passion that we had, that we were kind of raised with this idea that our lives would be consumed by great controversy, and that it would be a big privilege for us if we were able to play an effective role in public debates. And these were things that I didn't appreciate until I was able to change that paradigm and change the trajectory of our relationship and start seeing her as a human being rather than a parent. And, today I have an extraordinary relationship with her. And when I walk into the room, I can see her light up, that she's, so happy to see me. She actually likes my wife even better than she likes me. And so I'm just, I'm grateful to her. And then, look, I have 7 kids of my own. And I marvel every day about how my mother got us all to show up at dinner on time. We had to have a poem ready when we got to dinner. We said prayers before dinner. We said prayers after dinner. We said a rosary every day. We went to church every day. We were up in the morning. We had to have our fingernails cleaned, our hair brushed before we showed up at the dinner table. And we had to participate in group conversations. There was no such thing as talking to your neighbor when you're at the table. You had to talk to everybody, and everybody got a chance to talk. And when you played football, everybody had to be included. And she was able to enforce that discipline. And, I have all these kids now, and, if you don't have a good relationship with your children, just wait till they have children, and they'll start appreciating you. And, that made me, having my own kids made me even, more reverential toward what my mother accomplished as a single mom with 11 kids who were, raucous, rowdy, rebellious children, every one of them. And she was able to keep us all in line and give us that kind of discipline that has served me for the rest of my life.
Tangentially, whenever I listen to Bobby Kennedy, I always ask myself, is a man this honest capable of being president? I don't know. I don't know. He speaks such authenticity, God Almighty. Ricky, I hope so you want to be the leader of the free world, like your uncle was, like your father almost was. Don't you believe, Bobby, you have to hate evil enough to fight it? Iran, which now controls Damascus, it controls Beirut, it controls Yemen, it controls Baghdad. Don't you at least believe that maybe you're being too forgiving of this evil if America is the only real, that little wall you see around, that's America and the rest of the world, not that you guys are evil. Don't you believe that maybe you're being too forgiving?
Well, that's a lot of questions. As you know, I support Israel. I think that Hamas has to be destroyed. I try not to hate because I think hating is like swallowing poison and hoping someone else will die, that it actually is corrosive to ourselves. But I also understand that there are justified wars. I think almost every war that we fought in the last century was unjustified and unnecessary. World War II was justified. We were attacked. World War I, we should have never gotten into, and my grandfather opposed it, and I believe he was correct. It was a war to preserve empires, and most of our wars have ulterior motives. Israel was attacked. Israel has no choice but to destroy Hamas. Israel was in the middle of a ceasefire. Hamas, as I've made the point again and again, has not only victimized Israel, but it is holding the Palestinian people hostage. I am pro-Palestinian, and as you pointed out, there was a Palestinian who pled guilty to murdering my father. He is serving a prison sentence. My brother was hijacked by Palestinians. In 1971, his plane was hijacked to Yemen in a commercial airliner, and the plane was blown up in the desert. And the demand of the terrorists was that Sirhan be released from prison. I have fought for Sirhan has now been in prison for almost 60 years. And I have fought for his payroll. When he was convicted, my wife sent a letter to the judge asking that he not be given the death penalty. So I don't believe that hatred is a good thing. I believe that. And I also believe that Israel has no choice but to destroy Hamas. And, they were in the middle of the fifth ceasefire when the attack took place. People who are now demanding that Israel have a ceasefire. And by the way, Israel is still getting attacked every day by missiles. And we hear this trope that Gaza is the most densely populated place on earth. Well, guess what? Tel Aviv has twice the population density, and it is being targeted by missiles all the time. And the Israelis have exercised more forbearance than any other people in the world would. Instead of attacking, if the United States was attacked by Mexico, if Mexico elected a government that then said, we're going to reclaim Texas, and they sent missiles onto San Antonio, we would not build an Iron Dome. We would go into Mexico and destroy the people who did that. And we wouldn't wait 16 years. We'd do it today, and every other nation in the world would do that immediately. If a smaller neighbor declared war on them and declared genocide against their people, there is no nation in the world that would put up with it except Israel. And it's odd to me that people are now faulting Israel for finally, after 16 years, going in to remove Hamas, and 5 failed ceasefires, each one of which Hamas has used to regroup, to rearm, to raise the banner, and to train more and more kids to indoctrinate children from when they're toddlers to kill Jews, and there's no stop, there's no end to it unless there is no peace. I believe in a two-state solution. Rabbi doesn't agree with me, but that's never going to happen when Hamas is in control. It can't. I want the Palestinians to have sovereignty. I want them to have their own state, their own freedom. But that cannot happen while Hamas is in control. And, people have a short-sighted belief that ceasefire will stop the killing. But as a statesman, I have to try to stop the killing. The amount of people who die over the long term. And the way to do that is by rooting out Hamas now. And, I'll say this, that, I was so touched by your description, and I shared this with some of the families that I talked to in the early days of October. I lost two of my brothers, including, after my father died, and one of my brothers died. I asked my mother if the hole that they leave in you, that our loved ones leave in you when they pass, if that hole ever gets any smaller. And my mother said to me, it never gets any smaller. But our job is to grow ourselves bigger around the hole. And the way that we do that is by considering the person we lost and taking the best aspects of their character, the greatest virtues they had, the things that we admire about them, that we loved about them, and trying to incorporate those things into our own character through discipline, through restraint, through dedication and devotion. And in doing that, we make ourselves larger, and the whole then gets proportionally smaller, and the pain becomes bearable after time. And we also, in doing that, bestow on that person who we lost a kind of immortality, because then they live forever through our character and through our example. And when you were talking about your daughter and her love of dancing, it made me think of this passage in the Bible that I've always wondered about David, King David, who was the most beloved not only by God but by the Jewish people. And that when he brought in the Ark of Covenant after a great victory, and he was chosen the king over Saul, he danced, he drank, and he danced all night. And he was later berated by King Saul's wife, by Micah, who said that he had humiliated himself, and that he had disgraced himself, and that he had lost his dignity. And he said to her, and I will do it again, and I'll do it worse the next time, because the people love me, and God loves me. And, God wants us to celebrate. He didn't put us here to be grim, to obey a bunch of rules. He put us here to celebrate the life that he gave us. In my own religious tradition, Jesus, who was a Jew and always considered himself a Jew, his first miracle by which his divinity was revealed to the public was when he turned water into wine for a wedding celebration so that people could dance, so that they could celebrate. Because that is ultimately what Shani described as this communal experience that she had through her dancing with all these other people that was like a prayer. That is the ultimate prayer that God wants. I've always heard that God can't be angry at you if you're grateful. That no matter how bad you behave, if you have gratitude toward God for what you've been given, that he can't stay mad at you for long. And, Shani was a beautiful, beautiful girl, just stunningly beautiful, but she was also a luminous soul. She put out a huge light, and everybody saw that. And she celebrated her life and her happiness, and she saw God in that celebration. And that's an extraordinary example for all of us to learn from and to try to incorporate in our own lives.
You know, Bobby, in running to be president, you missed your calling. You would have made a great rabbi. That was a beautiful sermon. There at your father's funeral and you're 14. And now you know that 1 billion people watched this video. It's horrific. And I had to ask your permission to show it. Yeah. And you both said we should show it. Because you want, and it was like what your aunt said when your uncle was murdered. She wouldn't take off her dress. And Lady Bird Johnson begged her before the swearing in of Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson didn't want pictures of the blood on Jackie's dress. And the photographer, he told him to take the picture from on top. You don't see the blood on her dress. And she famously said over and over again, I want them to see what they did. But is it harder to mourn and grieve when the murder, when the loss, when the catastrophe is so public, Bobby? Take care.
I find it hard to answer that question because I feel like it was probably easier for us because, first of all, I had a very supportive family and a very, deep religious faith and a lot of role models for how to process grief. But also, I had this experience of having the whole world share the grief with our family, and I think that that is a source, ultimately, of comfort. Like Ricarda talked about the neighbors coming over and bringing food and consoling her. And I think that any time that you share a burden with other people, that it cuts the burden in half. And I think I feel privileged that I was able to have so many other people share part of that burden. And over my lifetime, over the past 55 years, I've had so many people come up to me, almost daily because of what I'm doing now. People come up and say, I never got over your dad's death. That moment changed my life. And it's comforting to hear that so many other people's lives were also disrupted by that tragedy, that I was not bearing it alone, that there were other people bearing it with me. And so, there may have been moments that I would have rather been alone, but, I had moments alone to grieve. And I think the fact that so many people felt the loss in ways that were different than me, but also similar to me, was a source of comfort to myself and to other members of my family.
But you didn't feel that eyes were on you and you couldn't cry and you couldn't grieve because people expected you to have this face of strength?
Well, there may have been moments like that, but I still had times alone. I wasn't always in the public eye. The best way that I can answer your question is that I think it was probably easier than it was if my dad was shot and died and nobody cared about it. A lot of people cared, and that I think that that was comforting to me.
And Ricky, you feel the same way?
I think I feel the same way. Yeah, the same way. Yeah, it helps sharing the grief. I met some people that also their child was killed in an accident or something terrible, and they were alone. There nothing else happens, and it was the most difficult for them to be out there, and everything is normal, and nobody kind of cares or nobody understands and they were grieving alone, I think that's more difficult. But the reason that we are allowed to share this terrible video is not because of the grief or something. It is, I have the feeling I was the most saddest really seeing the reactions all over the world, not what's happening in Israel, but how people see what happened in Israel and don't understand really what is happening. And since then, we're really on a quest a little bit to, me in Germany and he also in television, to share the story from a real person. I mean, we're the persons, we were affected, and we tell the story of Shani, of the beautiful and happy girl that was killed in such a brutal way, in order to make the world understand. And that's the reason. I really hate to see the video, and I don't like it too, but you know, I overcome the video. We've seen it so many 100 times to find all the little clues. So we don't mind as long as it helps just to share the story and give a personal story out to the world that is real and it's not fake news and it happened and that's the reason.
And you've been, Shani's memory has been particularly embraced in Germany, and the German chancellor was the first world leader to go to Israel after the massacre, and he had to lie on the floor in Ben Gurion Airport because rockets were landing on his aircraft. Nissim, I wish that I could share the optimism that Bobby expressed so eloquently and that Ricky expressed in it the first time I interviewed her as well. But you seem to maybe share with me a bit of the skepticism that the problem with the murder of your daughter is that it's not going to end with her, that this conflict isn't going to end. And you're looking for solutions. And you brought up a very controversial solution. You said that you don't see a future for the Palestinian people living in Gaza. We have not seen any nations embrace even a single Palestinian refugee. So first of all, let me be clear. I totally agree with Bobby Kennedy running for president of the United States that the Jewish people's conflict is not with the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are my brothers, they are my sisters. Islam is a great world religion that I revere. And it is a pure monotheism, it's a beautiful religion. The problem is Hamas, the problem are the terrorists, the problem is the indoctrination, the problem is the extremists. And yet, Gaza is rubble. And to rebuild it again, there have been 5 wars since the 2005 withdrawal. My children sitting here tonight, and remember guys, you cannot leave. My kids are going to be the last people writing letters with the Lukes and with Bobby and the Torah. So my children were the last kids to plant trees in Gaza as Jews before the 2005 Hitnatkut, before the withdrawal. I took them there. It was Tu B'Shvat, which was 3 days ago, the anniversary, the Jewish New Year for trees, and we planted trees.